Have you ever had a relationship where the hardest part wasn't actually the conflict? It was what happened afterward. Maybe someone got hurt. Maybe you got defensive. Maybe someone raised their voice. Maybe something was said that couldn't be taken back. But then you tried to come back. You apologized. You tried to explain what happened for you. You tried to understand their experience. And somehow, instead of repair, there was silence, distance, defensiveness, dismissal, or sometimes even estrangement. I've been thinking about this a lot because rupture and repair has become one of the deepest lessons in my own relationships and in my own healing. I'm Alison Batty Capps. I'm a licensed therapist, a wellness coach, a spiritual mentor, and the author of The Divine Within, Healing Ourselves to Heal the World. And although I have spent many years studying trauma, psychology, neuroscience, mindfulness, spirituality, and healthy relationships, I'm also a human being who has to learn these lessons personally. And one of the things I am learning is that healthy relationships are not relationships without rupture. Rupture is inevitable. We disappoint each other. We misunderstand each other. We become overwhelmed. We communicate badly. We have different needs. We sometimes react from old wounds. The question isn't, how do we never hurt each other? The question is, what do we do when we do hurt each other? Healthy repair requires something that sounds simple, but can actually be very difficult. Both people have to be willing to make room for the other person's experience. That doesn't mean agreeing. It doesn't mean deciding that one person is right and the other person is wrong. It means being able to say, I can understand why you experienced it this way, and I can tell you what I experienced. Both things can coexist. This has been a huge lesson for me. For much of my life, when someone I loved was upset at me, I became very focused on either understanding their pain or defending mine. I wanted to know what I had done wrong. I wanted them to understand my perspective. I wanted to apologize. I wanted them to apologize to me. I wanted to make it better, and I wanted them to make it better. And sometimes that was healthy accountability, but sometimes I went too far. I would start either abandoning my experience in order to restore the relationship, or I would over-explain and try to help them to understand not only my role, but their role. I would think maybe I should explain myself better. Maybe if they understood psychology, they would understand the dynamic between us. Maybe I need to apologize again. Maybe if I can just understand them enough, they'll understand me. And eventually, I realized something important. Repair cannot be created by one person alone. One person can initiate repair. One person can apologize. One person can take responsibility for their role. One person can offer compassion for the other person's experience. But mutual repair requires two people. And that's where boundaries became important in my own healing. I used to think a boundary was primarily about getting another person to behave differently. Now I understand it differently. A boundary is about deciding what I will and will not participate in. For example, I don't want to continue a conversation where yelling, especially if I'm yelling. And I don't want to participate in triangulation where one person is talking about their experience of another person with me or vice versa. I don't want to have a conversation about one family member through another family member. I need to calm down before I can communicate effectively or listen effectively. I need other people to express themselves in I statements and their experience of their perceptions rather than speaking in absolute truths or making statements about my character or my intentions. Those aren't necessarily attempts to control another person. They're ways of saying, this is what I need in order to participate in this relationship in a healthy way. And I've had to learn that someone else is allowed to disagree with my boundaries or needs. But their disagreement does not automatically make my boundaries or my needs unreasonable. And it doesn't make their boundaries or their needs unreasonable. We generally might need something different. At the same time, I've also had to look honestly at myself. There have been moments where I have raised my voice. I've become defensive. I've communicated in ways that were unhelpful. I've reacted from old emotional patterns instead of responding from the person I want to be. And I don't want to use my trauma as an excuse. Understanding why I react a certain way is important, but understanding is not the same as avoiding responsibility. I can say this makes sense given what I've experienced, and I can understand the same about the other person. I can also say I still want to learn to respond differently, and if I'm going to stay in relationship with them, I need them to be willing to learn how to respond differently too. That distinction has become incredibly important to me, because healthy accountability is not everything is my fault, and it isn't nothing is my fault. It is what is mine to own. What did I contribute? What can I repair? What can I do differently next time? What belongs to the other person? Their feelings, their choices, their communication, their willingness or unwillingness to repair, their boundaries, their behavior. And sometimes one of the hardest things in healing is accepting that I cannot do their part for them. I can invite someone into repair. I can say, this is the way I understood your experience. Tell me more. I can say, I'd like you to understand my experience. I'd like us to try to find compromise, to both take responsibility for our parts, and I'd like us to be willing to find ways to grow together. But I cannot force another person to participate. And that can be incredibly painful, especially when you understand that they have their own trauma, their own fears, their own history, and their own reasons for responding the way they do. And I've had to learn that having compassion does not require me to keep participating in relationships that hurt me. I can understand someone's pain and still have a boundary. I can believe someone is struggling and still say, this relationship, as it currently functions, isn't sustainable for me. I can love someone and step away. And perhaps most importantly, I can stop seeing stepping away as a failure of my compassion. Sometimes stepping away is what allows me to stop reenacting the same pattern that I am trying to stop, where I become reactionary, where I engage in yelling, where I engage in triangulation. Because I have learned that there is a difference between repair and pursuit, repair and repeating unhealthy patterns. Repair says, I've expressed my experience, I've owned my part, I've invited you to meet me there. Pursuit says, I have to keep explaining until you finally understand me, or until you're willing to own your part. And I've spent too much of my life in the second place. So my growth now is not about becoming someone who never gets triggered. It's not about becoming perfectly regulated. It's not about never raising my voice, never getting defensive, or never making a mistake. My growth is about catching myself sooner, pausing, taking responsibility without collapsing into shame, listening without abandoning myself, setting boundaries without using them as weapons, and recognizing when a relationship is moving towards repair and mutual accountability, and when I'm simply repeating an old cycle and hoping that things will be different. Healthy rupture and repair doesn't mean that every relationship survives every rupture. Sometimes repair leads to stronger relationships. Sometimes it leads to a different kind of relationship. And sometimes it leads to recognizing that the relationship needs to end. But even then, I can choose to leave with integrity. I can say, I care about you. I understand that you experienced it that way. I have my experience too. I've taken responsibility for what belongs to me, and I'm no longer willing to participate in this particular pattern. For me, that is what healing has begun to look like. Not proving that I am right, not convincing someone that they are wrong, not becoming so compassionate towards another person's pain that my own pain has to disappear from the relationship, but learning how to hold compassion and boundaries, accountability and self-respect, connection and autonomy, and perhaps most importantly, that healthy relationships require room for two human beings to exist, two experiences, two sets of needs, two imperfect people. And when there is rupture, two people who are willing to turn towards one another and say, something happened here. Let's understand it together. Let's own our own part, and let's see whether we can find our way forward together in compromise. This is the kind of relationships I'm learning to build. And it is also the kind of relationship that I am learning that I deserve. If this resonates, I hope you'll consider following. I'm interested in learning how you understand relationships and how you handle rupture and repair. Leave a comment. And if you want to go deeper, I invite you to read my book, The Divine Within, Healing Ourselves to Heal the World, or go to my website, blossomingheartwellness.com, to learn how to work with me. I help individuals understand their own patterns of communication and behaviors, to understand their core wounds, and to develop ways to communicate what's happening inside themselves in healthy ways, and how to set boundaries and communicate effectively. I'm still learning that process too, so perhaps together we can learn. Sending you deep love and appreciation for who you are.